So good morning, everyone. Bonjour, bienvenue à tout le monde. I'm not an engineer, as Mary just said. My husband's an engineer. My daughter is in software engineering, where there are not a lot of girls. So I know a bit what's going on. But I'm a historian. I love to look into the stories and the history of women engineers in Canada. So let me say first, I'm very honored to have been asked to contribute to this very exciting event today. And I wish to thank very warmly Mary and Anne for giving me such a great opportunity. And I want to congratulate them both for the amazing work they've done to bring to fruition the Women of Impact initiative. So that project, Women of Impact project, is important in so many ways. First, it addresses the sharp underrepresentation of women in 3 specific engineering fields. And we know what they are: mining, metallurgy, and materials. And as you all know, engineering includes a large number of subdisciplines, with some attracting more girls than others. And we saw the graphs. Data is very important. Graphs are very important. So establishing these often striking variations is very important to help us search for more sophisticated answers to the basic question, why still so few? But Mary and Anne are also interested in other key questions. That is, who are those women who chose to study and work in mining, metallurgy, and materials? What brought them to these fields? Were they from such a small minority? What challenges, but also what opportunities did they encounter along their way to success? So these are the questions that led Mary and Anne to undertake this project, to retrieve and record the stories of women who have led successful careers and played leadership roles across Canada in these 3 fields. As they both admit, the result has greatly surpassed their expectations, and indeed, the book, and it's out there, I've seen it, includes the profiles of 18 accomplished women whose personal and professional lives are described in the first-person narrative. Please allow me to make just a few general observations on the book, as these are aimed to establish a link between these 18 women's profiles and those of the pioneers that I will be presenting to you in a couple of minutes. First, I was struck by the great diversity of these women's profiles with respect to their country of birth, race, ethnicity, and cultural and socioeconomic background, with respect to the stages in their career. Some are recognized pioneers, others are emerging leaders, and to their work locations, academia, government, industry, both in Canada and abroad. Taking together, these stories reveal the complexity of women's lives. Clearly, several factors and motives account for the decision to enter a field of science or engineering, while a myriad of forces and circumstances can shape and affect a woman's journey in her chosen profession. At the same time, there are common threads that unite the various stories. A striking one is these women's expressed and continuing desire to make a difference and improve society through their work and career. They're also concerned with the continuing low participation of women in their field, and they understand the importance of serving as mentors and role models and to perform various forms of advocacy work. Once again, as you will see, there are similarities between these women of impact and the mold breakers and gender benders who came before them. So let me present these 4 mothers to you. I cannot introduce all of them today, but what I want to do is to provide you with some historical examples of their diverse backgrounds, but also of their shared commitment to improve the status of women in engineering in their respective historical period and location. And to end, I want to show you how the collection, development, and preservation of personal records and of various other source material constitute the essential first steps leading to the discovery and celebration of the rich and dynamic lives of pioneering women engineers who have shaped your own lives, but also mine as a women's historian. So let's begin. We'll go back in time. I don't need my glasses with that great screen. I realize this. My God, it's amazing. So let's go back to the early 20th century, okay? And the first slide you see, I just saw it by pure accident this week while I was, Googling at U of T archives, and this was on their website of the archives. And I asked, where are the women in mining at U of T? You will see there are no women, okay? This is not surprising, but I felt it was really making a strong statement. So the mining program started in the early 20th century at U of T, and I will go and reprimand the U of T archives because there are no dates, so telephone call when I have time. Okay. So this one is one of my favorites. It's a picture of the engineering, they call them the fourth-year chemicals. 1934 at University of Toronto, Faculty of Engineering. And who do you see on the picture? Well, there's only one graduate. Her name is Melba Greer. And I always say to my students, look at Melba and the coat she's wearing. Now, what does it tell you is that Melba came from a very well-off background. Her parents were wealthy. She had decided to do engineering. They let her do it. They supported her. The sad thing about Melba, remember this is 1934, is that she got married as soon as she graduated and never practiced her profession. Because once you married at the time, it was over, you became a wife and a mother. But I love Melba being there and, being one of those rare few who attended U of T, the Faculty of Engineering at the time. Now, another interesting one. This is 1945. The war has just ended, and the Canadian government told to parents, to young people, we have to rebuild the world. Technology is what, will bring us, to the post-World War II prosperity that we want. Let's go into engineering. So there's some girls who actually responded to the call and decided to enroll at U of T, Faculty of Engineering, right after the end of the war, and they went to Ajax. I don't know if you heard about Ajax. There were so many male veterans coming back from the war in Canada that they were admitted free. No, they didn't have to pay fees at the Faculty of Engineering to train those future engineers. So they had to build in Oshawa a campus. I think it took less than a year to build it, and they send the students to Oshawa to do their studies. And they accepted women. That was a period where you say, okay, we'll accept the women in engineering. So the title is just wonderful of the caption, though. This is from one of the newspapers in Toronto. They called it an invasion of women at Ajax. Invasion referring to 9 women admitted out of 1,409. So just to show how you can explain this phenomena in 1945, and you see the ladies there taking the bus with the veterans to go to Ajax, pursue their studies. So numbers are important. You see, we're always going back to numbers in that period of time as well. Now, of course, we have to talk about Elsie Gregory Mcgill, a trailblazer, and we all love Elsie. My student, Crystal Sissons, just published a book on Elsie Gregory Mcgill. She won a prize for her book based on her PhD thesis. So Elsie is the first woman to graduate in electrical engineering at U of T in 1927. She was so cute at the time. She had this flapper hairstyle. I don't know if you know what I mean, the short hair, and came from a very well-off family also. Her mother was one of the first female judges in Canada, but they were all feminists and defenders of women's rights. But Elsie was also a great engineer. She was an aeronautical engineer, aircraft designer, but always kept on with her advocacy. She was a confessed feminist and human rights activist. And I want you to read what she told the Engineering Journal in 1975, just below. She was talking about women in engineering at that time, and this is during the women's liberation movement was starting. Women engineers, she says, are still confined in a corset of Victorian prejudice. Their future is in the hands of the male power clique that makes its decisions at the all-male engineers' table in the dining room or in the washroom. Well, she explained things the way she understood it, and this was in 1975. Now, Elsie became very famous during the war because she designed an aircraft, which was called the Hurricane, and she even had a cartoon made to celebrate, her story. And what's shocking with people like me is that her success at the time was completely uncaptured by my colleagues, historians of science. They don't, devote a chapter to her in their books. So she was famous at the time, and just to show you how you can erase people from history. And Elsie now, of course, because of the books, because of the work on her, is known more and more by people all around, I would say, the world. She was a committed feminist. She sat on the Royal Commission on the Status of Women. Everybody admired her work, and you see her there standing on the left. She was very diminutive women physically, but spunky, as my student says, as Crystal said. Oh, okay. Now, another group of girls that I think you would be interested in are those female students who were at l'École Polytechnique de Montréal, qu'on appelait la Poly. We called it the Poly, we still do. So these young ladies established the Comité F, that means Comité Femmes, women, and they started to promote the main principles of Quebec's feminist movement. And you see their T-shirts there where they're all sticking together. And they actually wrote interesting articles in the Polytechnique student newspaper about the women's movement. So they became quite well known at the time, and were, again, fledgling feminists, but also, of course, interested in pursuing engineering. Another activist from La Poly, which I think it's important to honor her also, is Claudette Mcgill. Some of you may even known her or heard of her. She established WISE. I know all the students, probably professors, know about WISE, Women in Science and Engineering. She established that group in 1977, and she was the founding president, and chapters were created all over the country in the universities that still exist today. So Claudette also deserves to be known and celebrated because she organized the first Canadian Convention of Women Engineers in 1981, and was the first woman president of the Association of Professional Engineers of Ontario in 1986. She did a lot of interesting things also, but just wanted to point that out, and worked in government, the public sector, private sector, had a great career, but died unfortunately too early. Now, another woman who's a pioneer in the history of women in engineering in Canada is Monique Fries. Here you have a very young Monique, where they're announcing that she was awarded the first national chair for women in science and engineering in 1989. Monique is a biomedical engineer. She's now retired. Was the first woman to graduate at Ottawa U in electrical engineering. After holding the national chair, she occupied the regional chair for Ontario at the University of Ottawa and at Carleton University. I'll go very quickly, but she did write a seminal report called More Than Just Numbers in 1992. Why it's so important, the title says it all. What she said is that it's not just enough to bring more and more women in the pipeline, to bring them more in universities, in education, and in the profession. We have to transform the institutions. We have to transform the culture of engineering to help retain the women in universities, in the workplace, and have them succeed in the profession. It was a very important paradigm shift. She said, listen, we have to focus on the institutions. She also was very, very successful in going global by establishing in 2001 INWES, the International Network of Women Engineers and Scientists. And what Monique has done recently, she donated her archives to the University of Ottawa. So I want to mention this because as a historian, this is a very important thing that she's done. Okay, her colleague and friend, Claire Deschaines, who has promoted during her career Francophone women in science and engineering, also had an NSERC chair, but this one for the region of Quebec, and deserves to be known because she founded the first organization, Francophone organization, for women in science and engineering, what we call the STEM fields more generally, in 2002. So has done a lot again to promote la francophonie chez les femmes en sciences et génie. And last but not least, I want to finish with Ursula Franklin, first professor of metallurgy and materials science at the University of Toronto, 1967. You have here the cover of her two recent books, Pacifism as a Map and Ursula Franklin Speaks, Thoughts and Afterthoughts. There's so much to be said about Ursula. It could take a day, a week, but just to summarize, everybody describes her as a great, of course, engineering professor, but also as a feminist, a pacifist. She was in this great organization called Voice of Women in the 60s and 70s and did her work there for peace. A mentor, educator, and public debater. There were not a lot of women who went and debated issues publicly, and she did it. Was born in Munich, was in prison in a Nazi labor camp because her mother was Jewish, then completed her PhD, came to Canada, worked in various venues, again, private sector, public sector, became a professor, the first female professor in metallurgy and materials, 1967, received all sorts of honors, including what's so interesting, the Elsie Gregory Mcgill Memorial Award. And she admired Elsie, and still does, of course, admires Elsie a lot. Why is she, again, so important for all of us is that she articulated the first comprehensive feminist critique of technology in Canada. I got some of her two famous books here that she published on the topic. And what was always what preoccupied her was to see how machines can affect the well-being of people and how they can, help her and all other activists in the pursuit of peace and social justice. So she actually made the link between engineering and social justice early in the game, early in her career. She also thinks that history is very important, and of course I have to mention that. And she gives, a key role to feminist historians. And I had a lot of conversations with Ursula. I went to visit her several times at her residence where she is now. And she says, yes, you have to look out for signals. That's your job, Where are the women where they're not? Why are they so invisible? I was talking about Elsie Mcgill. How come? Where are the women in science and engineering? How does discrimination function historically, and what have women done about discrimination? So she always asked me, these are the questions, or told me these are the questions you have to ask Ruby and find answers to. And she even had a specific, research agenda for feminist historians. And clearly, as a good engineer, she came, we had sheets of paper, 1, 2, 3, 4. And these were the two main ones. She says, you have to explore how women's involvement in science and engineering over the past half-century has furthered the women's movement and feminism, and to assess how women's presence in science over many decades has had an impact on women in general and on the wider society. You may want to discuss this yourself, today and in the future. So I will give her the final words from Ursula, her latest book called Thoughts and Afterthoughts. And she had these final words on the then and the now. Again, importance of history to understand the present. And she says, the privilege of having been able to work, think, write, talk, and most of all, listen and observe things, brings with it the obligation of thoughtfully comparing the here and now with the then and before. That's why I like the notion of thoughts and afterthoughts. And if we continue on that same page, she says, we all have to look at history to help us understand, how we can be relevant today. And for her, that was, again, something that all of us women had to think about carefully. Now, I'm going to end by something I'm very proud of, is that the last time I saw Ursula was in the spring at her house, and she said, Ruby, I don't know what to do with my papers. And she had ideas to where to, donate them. And I said, why don't you give them at the University of Toronto Archives? Your career was there. And people like me, my students, people like her colleagues, the young generation, will want to have an easy access to your records. She wanted to spread them around the country. Anyway, and then I said, it's important that we can have easy access and write this wonderful story and the story of women in engineering through your own life, through your own experiences. So she said, let me think about it. And she had already given some of her papers, but most of it was in her basement, or in her room. So she called me, she sent me an email, I went back and I learned that she decided to give all the remaining records to the University of Toronto Archives. And Val, I must say I used you as an example. I came with my arguments and I said, Professor Davidson, a chair, gave her papers, to her university. Monique Fries had given her paper to the University of Ottawa. I said, you have to do the same thing. So this is the website of the U of T Archives, where they do announce the fact that they've recently acquired the second half of her papers, and these will be available to researchers in 2016. And they already had an exhibit this spring, where you see a photo of Ursula in her lab, but you can see some of the artifacts. And it says, we have to honor Dr. Franklin, a metallurgist first, research physicist, feminist, peace activist, author, and educator. I must say that I was quite emotional when I saw this. So we're trying at the University of Ottawa, but also with colleagues around the country, with Monique Fries, Claire Deschaines, to build an archives of women in science and engineering in Canada. We had a workshop to that effect last year. Catherine was there, other people were there, other chairholders, current and former. That is the NSERC chairs for women in science and engineering. This is Crystal, by the way, who wrote the book on Elsie, just there at the bottom of the page. And I hope that we can all build together, these are my last words, the archives of women scientists and engineers in Canada. And I want to thank you, Mary and Anne, for your very important contribution to this large-scale project, because collecting these stories is a historical document. And I just making a call, throwing a call to all of you to maybe try to develop similar projects that will benefit all of us, historians and engineers. Alors, merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.